Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and again, as a repeat performance, we have with us this evening the Chief of the Beverly Police Department, John LeLacheur. Welcome, John.
Thank you, George. Good to see you again.
How's the world treating you these days?
They're all starting to run together.
Okay. Couple of issues, I guess, that's come up that we're talking about is the state has finally passed a law on police reform, and you have prepared a draft, at least that's been circulated for the City of Beverly Police Department on use of force. So I guess the first question is, this new use of force draft that you put together, what's new and different about it?
The way we conduct business in itself doesn't change. It goes back to the way the policy has always been. What it does do, it emphasizes certain areas. Now, there have been certain changes in the law that are now written into the policy, things that we did anyway but weren't necessarily put in writing. We always, when we train, we always train to give warnings before we use any type of force, whether it's pepper spray, hands-on, the baton, taser, or a firearm. We always, you give a warning whenever possible. That's always the way we trained. It's just now written into the policy. The idea of chokeholds. The Commonwealth has never, ever trained in chokeholds. I've been through 3 separate types of police academies in my almost 40 years in law enforcement, and never, ever once were we ever taught to use a chokehold or a carotid restraint. Never. So it may have been taught in other parts of the country, and because of what happened in other parts of the country, there was maybe an assumption that it was taught here. It never has been so, but now it's in the policy. It's a prohibited act. The order or the right, or not only the right, you have a duty to intervene now. So in other words, if an officer was making an arrest and another officer either felt that they were maybe getting wound up or losing control, that you have a duty now to step in and relieve that officer, get him out of the situation, de-escalate the situation, or if force is being utilized that may be excessive, then it's your duty to not only intervene, but then to also report it. Those are things that we always prescribed, but now it's actually written into the policy.
So basically nothing's really changed except it's now in writing.
It's clear in writing. It'll be clear in the training. Again, it was part of the training regiments, but now it'll be memorialized in the policy, which it's really a very important thing. Police reform in total is a very large package. The original bill that went in was 129 pages. I think the final bill that was signed was 137 pages. A lot of it didn't necessarily deal with police reform. There were other things thrown in there, but it's wide scoped in that there are certain training mandates that things we've done and had been doing, but now are being mandated. A new post certification basically department has been put in place. So now a police officer in the Commonwealth will have to be certified. This is something that the chiefs of police fought for, have been fighting for years, to have a certification, decertification process. We were unable to get anybody in the legislature to take it up. And then after the events of last year, it became a priority and it's passed. So we're actually pleased that post has passed, because it's something we've been asking for years.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that on one of our previous discussions, that this was one of the major issues that the Chiefs of Police Association was very adamant that we needed in the Commonwealth. So it's a good thing it finally passed. And I guess the other kinds of issues keep coming down to do we really have any differences? And when you start to talk of police reform, a lot of stuff shows up in the newspapers that I'm not sure it shows up in this bill, like the whole incident that 2 or 3 years ago now with the state troopers and the Troop E and their overtime problems. And the other one that showed up recently is the chief of police in Methuen, who is getting a very large salary. And these kind of issues, I don't think show up in the police reform kind of thing. But at the same time, these are the things that show up in the paper and attract an awful lot of attention. And I think that I think you made a comment, was quoted in Patch, that a lot of things are happening in the country, but they're not happening here. It's not our problem. It's somebody else's problem. And wish them best of luck to fix it, but don't apply that kind of logic to our system and saying, we got to do something to fix this when it's not a problem.
Well, yeah, a lot of things that Massachusetts police officers are probably some of the best trained in the country. There are other states that don't emphasize or focus a lot on police training. They swear you as a police officer, you get a minimum amount of training and you start to work, and you may not have to do the rigors that we do of in-service training, requalifying yearly and things to that effect. So that's staying in place. I mean, the part about decertification is important in that in those cases you mentioned before where, say, there is some type of misconduct, the Post Commission can now decertify those police officers if they felt there was some type of misconduct. And basically, they couldn't then go on to another police department. In other words, they can't leave one agency, they'd be decertified, go out west and try to apply to another department because there's now a statewide certification process. That's the importance of that part of the bill. That if someone's terminated from a job or they're decertified because of some reason through the Post Commission, they just can't go and get employed somewhere else. That's the importance of the Post Commission.
Well, I think the other thing that has shown up in the couple of different discussions I've had with you and with members of your staff is that I don't think, at least I didn't at the time, realize what's really going on in the police department, especially with regards to Sergeant Costa and Cindy Baez and Lisa Marcario. There's a lot of things happening that people say, we ought to make that happen. Well, it's happening. And it doesn't get the publicity. And therefore, I think people get the impression that we need to do something different when in reality, we're doing it. At least you guys are doing it.
Yeah, and we feel that the public, the citizenry of Beverly are very much supportive of the police department. And that they understand that, or now they're learning that, like you said, that we've had a domestic violence coordinator for years, a civilian. We now have a mental health or a jail diversion coordinator that goes out and handles these types of calls. These professional clinicians. And the call that, well, we should just send clinicians to certain types of calls and not send police officers. Like I've said to the past, that we get calls daily from medical and social professionals that they want us to go to calls with them because their clients could potentially be violent. So we're going to those types of calls all the time to protect the clinicians. I don't want to be talking out of turn, but I believe the case recently in Newton where they had a case where a gentleman robbed people at knife point, was in a hallway. They actually had a clinician there working with them when the gentleman attempted to attack them. So it's important that the clinicians are there because they do a tremendous job. They're able to get people into services right away. But also the public has to understand there are times when we have to provide protection for those professionals.
Well, I think that was one of the points that Lisa was making you start to think of the cost of transporting and handling people that have gotten out of control gets to be rather expensive. And if you had a clinician or a social worker waiting in the patrol car, and when things are quiet and peaceful enough, you can bring them in, then they can help to continue to diffuse the situation and make the proper judgment as to what should happen next, as opposed to the police have very little options that they can use. If they're really badly hurt, you put them in an ambulance and send them to the hospital. And if they're just acting up, put them in the jail overnight to calm them down until you can get something in. And I think this is another part of the bigger story, I think, in my mind, of what police really do.
And again, the nice thing that comes out of that is if the clinician can get to those calls when they're working, they can do an evaluation, they can make a phone call and do an immediate placement. We don't have to call an ambulance, take a person to the hospital. They may sit there 4 to 6 hours before they're seen, and then try to get them into placement. This way we take the burden off the emergency room, we take the burden off the systems, and then get a person to treatment much faster also. So we're actually in the process. We share the clinician, as Lisa said, too, with 6 communities through a Department of Mental Health grant. We're trying now to get a second clinician, either expand the grant or get a second grant through the Commonwealth so that we can break the 6 communities into 3 each, which would give us more access to the clinician on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's the other thing that came out of those 2 discussions, that it's a really active business. A lot more, and again, I read the police blogs every day, see what's going on in town, and you just don't see the level of activity that they talk about when you get them on the show and have a conversation. It's really a full-time job for both of them.
No, it really is.
So there's money to be saved. Yeah, it's going to cost us money to save money, but I think in the long run, it sounds like a better deal. And I guess the other question that comes to mind is, a month or 2 ago, I sat in on one of these Human Rights Commission meetings, and you were there among others, and they were talking at the time about different problems. And I noticed you made a comment that if you've got a real complaint, get it to me and I will do something about it. Has anybody ever complained to you?
Well, not as far as officers' involvement in dealing directly with the Human Rights Committee, not with issues directly with officers, but we certainly take a lot of calls and services for issues that have happened in the community. Back a few months ago, we had people throwing mail onto or flyers on other people's porches, which upset them greatly. So we immediately looked into that, and there's been some posting of stickers on stop signs and on walls that give us some concern. So we asked people to reach out to us immediately on that. Some cases of graffiti that were done in the summer, we were able to contact the sheriff's department that has a special crew that comes out and is able to get rid of graffiti. So that's when we actually ask for the public to send us messages or give us a call. Again, you can always go on our website and send anonymous tips when it comes to things, and we'll immediately look into it. But again, we take everything seriously. Any complaint that comes in, whether it's against an individual, a neighborhood, a traffic complaint, or possibly the possible misconduct of an officer, we take everything very seriously and we vet out everything and investigate everything.
The point I'm trying to get to is, do we really have a serious problem with officer misconduct? This could be the kind of information that shows up in the newspapers, but I don't see it here.
We have a tremendous police force. We have a very dedicated group of men and women, again, very highly trained. They really do a lot in the community. I mean, it's things that people don't see. It's the time we spend with Special Olympics, the time we spend with dealing with kids in the spectrum, getting into the schools with our school resource officers, going to community meetings. We have our monthly community advisory council meeting where it's an open forum. People can ask questions about what we're doing in the city. And again, it's a very tight-knit city. I think, like I say, everybody knows everybody. There's no real secrets. But everyone here, I think, does a tremendous job. And if we find there are issues, we deal with them. Are we perfect? No. People sometimes, are they short on the phones with people? Yes. When I take those complaints and investigate it, officers are either retrained or and sometimes the call that comes in was a little hostile and maybe, it could have been handled better on both ends, but we look into every case.
So I think the other part of the problem comes down to what do people really expect of the police? And on one hand, you'd like to be able to drive a little faster than the speed limit because that's there's nobody else on the road and it's okay. And get a little surprised when the lights start flashing in your rearview mirror. And that's most of the interactions I think most people have with the police. And yet at sometimes you look at some of these situations on TV where there's some serious rioting going on, and people would expect the police to come in and stop it, and protect my property, protect me. And one of the issues I think that came up, and it shows up in your use of force, is they start to talk about less than lethal munitions. And you get into this whole issue about, do you fire rubber bullets? Do you use tear gas? Do you use other kinds of things? I think the beanbag was one of them that gets to be kind of popular in some places. And you see on TV, there's a whole group of people say, oh, no, we shouldn't do that. And at the same time, there's another group of people say, the police shouldn't have guns. You know? So I guess there needs to be a education process of and an understanding of what do you really expect the police to do and what do they really do. And I think this new format you've put together about using force and regulations and limits is part of it, but at the same time, that's a long document to read through. By the way, it didn't cure my insomnia.
Well, and again, once a lot of this is implemented, it's going to take a lot of training again to make sure everyone understands the policy. The goal of any arrest is to use the minimal and least amount of force necessary to effect an arrest. If a person's compliant, there's never any full force used. We don't ever use force against somebody who's non-compliant. And I think what happens is always, or there's some that misunderstand that once you're told you're under arrest, you're under arrest. Even if you don't think it's legal, if you don't think it's right, you do not have the right to resist arrest. And that's where some people get in trouble because they think, well, I don't think you can arrest me for that, so I'm not going to go with you. And that's where problems occur. You can never, ever refuse to comply to an arrest. You know, in the same trend, we have people that sometimes you may have seen it where a person's being placed in custody and their friends come in and try to pull them away and, you know, basically help them escape, which is a felony. And people think that, oh, if we just pull the guy away, it's like a kid's game. We win, we have him, and you can't go back to jail. And that's not the case. So there's some education that has to go. I mean, maybe back to, I don't know if it's more on the younger side, but you know, don't watch TV shows and think that that's the way it's going to be. You have to. We deal in reality. And if you're told you're under arrest, you submit to the arrest, and you handle it in court. That's the best way to handle it. Once you start to resist and flail and fight, that's when things are going to go downhill because we have a duty, an obligation to complete that arrest and get you in front of the court. And we let them determine guilt and innocence.
Yeah, well, I think that's the other point that you made about everybody gets their idea of how the world works by watching TV, and I think one of the ones, my favorite shows is NCIS Los Angeles, and they've got a really big guy on the show, Sam Hanna, who can come up to anybody, throw a chokehold on him, and the guy passes out in 30 seconds. And it's magic kind of thing. And I think a lot of people just don't understand. And that's one of the things that bothers me is they keep calling it a chokehold, when in reality, you're really blocking the carotid artery and you're cutting off somebody's blood flow to their brain. And when your brain runs out of blood, it goes to sleep. And I think back to when I was a kid, I was a fan of professional wrestling, and there was one of the professional wrestlers, Mr. Moto, who had a sleeper hold, and that's exactly what he would do. Put somebody in a headlock, block his carotid artery, and out like a light they go. So, yeah, it can happen, and that sounds scary as all hell to me.
Yeah, it's actually a very dangerous practice, and that's why it's actually, you know, barred for that particular reason, because, you know, if you don't do it perfectly, you can seriously or permanently injure somebody. That's why it's never been taught in our field.
Yeah, the TV shows, they got a script writer that everybody follows the script, both the guy that's doing it and the guy that's done too.
Well, yeah, I
Real
mean,
world, it doesn't
they,
work.
and they know they're going home at the end of their filming, and that's the fear that
Yeah,
we have every night, that we're not going to go home. So that's why, we're trained as well as we are, because your goal is to end your shift and go home to your families.
and I think that's an important point you made, that once the police officer says the magic words, you're under arrest, that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
And I've seen enough articles written about what do you do when a cop stops you? And most every one of them says, you be polite and you talk civilly. And in most cases, the discussion will end with a couple of words of wisdom, and that's it. And I've been stopped twice in my whole career. That's not bad. And in both cases, it was exactly that. Uh, I got a talking to in one case. In the other case, still don't know why I was stopped. I got my car checked over. I was checked over, and away I went back to work. So it works. And I think that's the other thing that you mentioned, that it's not a kid's game, that if we put them back, then it's all over and we win kind of thing. It's it's a real serious problem. If you get stopped, it's done for a reason. I think that's the other issue that people get nervous about. Well, it's profiling. But yet you hear enough of these stories about somebody was stopped for a traffic violation, and oh yeah, there was a gun in the glove compartment, or there was so many bags of stuff under the seat. Or the one that got me is in Salem, they stopped a car that was driving around and flashing its lights. What kind of strange? They pull up to the guy and he's swallowing balloons full of black tar. And so, yeah, I guess police have to be vigilant. They're looking for real serious concerns. So they have a reason for what they're doing.
Well, again, I mean, I've told the story before where I remember many, many years ago, I stopped a car for not having headlights on at night. And as I walked up to the driver, he just absolutely started berating me, screaming and hollering at me that he wasn't speeding and why was I bothering him. And I let him go on for about 20, 30 seconds, and he finally stopped. And I asked him if he was done. And he said yes. I said, no, the reason I have you stop is you don't have your headlights on. He reached down and turned them on and said, oh, thank you, sorry. And he was on his way. So, we can't jump to conclusions. We can never jump to conclusions, and people can't, always assume that, what they think is happening is happening. Let us try to explain the circumstances. I mean, I remember, you tell a story. I was a young kid when I grew up in Lowell, and we were out one morning getting ready to go skiing, and we were driving down the street, and I got pulled over by a Lowell police cruiser, and had no idea why, and the officer came up, and another cruiser came up. Well, come to find out, there had been an armed robbery that had occurred just down the street and involved a car similar to the one I was driving. Once they realized that it was a total different make and color, after they had more information, we were let go. But that happened, and we were polite. They were polite. The incident was handled, and we went on our way. But it's something I always remember.
Yeah. So that's the other thing too. It's the police are real people, and they got a job to do. And what I think is hard for some people to realize, and I've got into this discussion with some more liberal guests I've had about you walk up to somebody, a police officer walks up to somebody, and it's a situation that you have no idea what he's doing, and he's got his hand on his gun. The implications are that he's probably chasing down somebody that's done something pretty bad, and there's a concern that this could escalate very quickly. And it's not just a macho game of, hey, I got the big gun and I got the vest on and I'm something special, but they want, like you said earlier, they want to go home tonight, and they don't want any surprises either. And
Yeah. Well, I say, Drew, that's the importance of us and part of de-escalation and not making assumptions. And there's a big difference between if someone's exactly matching the description of a person wanted for a crime compared to someone you're asking, did you see the person who just ran by here? You handle those things differently. But again, it's a type of thing where sometimes we can be our own worst enemies because you're in a high pressure situation. You're looking for someone who may have just committed a very violent act, you don't always have time to explain to people what's going on. I remember when I had a canine, I was tracking an individual through a large city and going over fences through backyards, and people coming out there, what are you doing? What are you guys doing here? And we're like, we'll get back to you. We can't explain right now. And they're hollering at us, get out of my yard. What are you doing? And we didn't have time to explain them. We're after a person with a gun that just, committed a crime. And then we just had to keep on doing our business. So as time goes by, I learned that to go back, and talk to people, say, listen, sorry I couldn't talk to you. We were trying to, it was a gentleman with a gun we were after, and we got him in custody. Sorry if we, interrupted. And then people are just so grateful when you come back and kind of explain what's happened. So in the heat of the moment, you can't always explain what's going on, but it's also a good idea to go back after if you can and say to people what happened, and they get a much better feel for the circumstances that you were involved with.
And they probably start to appreciate the fact that you were chasing down this bad guy that could have caused them some serious problems. He decided to hole up in his house.
Right.
And, again, we've had a situation like that several years ago around here. Helicopters overhead, and the police were chasing somebody, and my wife found him hiding in the bushes out next to our house. And she called somebody over, and they found him. They chased him someplace else, and eventually got him. And as they got to that kind of situation, it could have gotten much worse. So I think that's part of the whole story that needs to come out, not just what you see on TV going on in the big cities of Los Angeles and Chicago and Portland. I mean, they got serious problems, and I wish them luck, but defunding the police and taking the police off the street and replacing them with social workers, that's a non-starter. That's not a solution. That's just adding to the problem. The one that got me is one of the comments made is that in Chicago, because the police are out protecting the mayor, and they decided that, okay, why didn't we have somebody take over the neighborhood? And who's taking over the neighborhood? Latin Kings. I'm imagining that's not going to be exactly the kind of protection the natives really want. So anyway, I'm getting the warning that we're probably running out of time, and that's a good thing. So I guess what the final question really is, where do you think Beverly is going with regards to a lot of this police reform? Do you see anything coming down the line?
Well, again, we're going to follow the law. We're going to change our policy to make sure they fit the law. We're going to make sure that everyone's properly trained in it. We're going to maintain our training levels, do the best we can for the officers, which is certainly going to help, the citizens. We can, again, I've said it before, we're not pods that were dropped in this earth. We came from humanity. So we're not perfect. We make mistakes. We learn from our mistakes. And are there problems in Beverly that have to be addressed? Absolutely. I mean, we're not immune from issues that happen everywhere else. We just have to learn to work with our community, have open conversations, and just do the best we can. I mean, I think we had 29,000 calls for service last year and had like 234 arrests. So, we're not out there just arresting people all day long. We're handling a lot of types of calls. We're trying to be in the neighborhoods, talking to kids, talking to people, and doing the best we can to keep Beverly as safe as possible.
Yeah, it seems like you're doing a good job, because I'm fairly comfortable walking around town and any time of the day or night. And at the same time, I see a police car coming or going. Other than the noise they make when they turn the siren on, everything's fine.
Well, again, our goal is to make everyone feel that way, George. Everyone has to feel that way. That's our goal.
Yeah, I think you're doing it. Hey, thanks again. I appreciate your time, and good luck with this new policy that you're working on. And any new policies coming after that one?
There's probably going to be a bunch of changes down the road because of other things that are going on. I think policies always change because laws always change, whether it's search and seizure laws or eyewitness identification, domestic violence laws. So we're constantly, one of the things in law enforcement is it's not like some trades you learn the trade and that's it. Our trade changes every day.
Yeah, because the bad guys are getting smart too.
Some of them are.
Yeah. And one last question before I meant to ask you earlier. What's the take on this state law from the perspective of either the Chief of Police Association or the rank and file, the police unions?
Well, again, there's a lot of different views on it. I think that it was a type of thing that was put through, and there's some things that have to be readjusted. I mean, we were talking about it today, where a lot of it doesn't take effect till July 1st, and then on July 1st, things are supposed to be going into effect. So it's tough to empower a commission that doesn't start till July 1st, but then things go into effect July 1st. So we're going to work with the legislature, the different associations. I know the unions, the chiefs of police, major city chiefs. You know, we're working with the different state agencies, whether it's public safety, the legislature, and try to work our way through that. But we're just going to continue to do the best we can and provide the best services we can.
So the take I get is that you and the police chiefs really appreciate the idea that we have a certification process, and after that, it's all up for grabs.
I wouldn't say up for grabs, but I think there's a lot of things that still have to be
Work in
worked out.
progress.
It's a work in progress, yes.
Yep. Okay. Hey, thanks again, Chief. I appreciate your time, and have fun.
Just thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for paying attention with us tonight. And again, if you have any questions and you want to have a different opinion on the show, my email is at the end. Give me an email and we can arrange for you to have your point of view proposed. Thanks again.